Yeah, it's working. So my name's Lucy. I'm the president of the Politics and Sociology Society. I'm a third year and final year student in politics and business management. I'm delighted to welcome our guest here, Senator Annie Hoey, for the Labour Senator, and also Liam Cosgrove, the president and founder of L.E.A.D Ireland and our active citizenship senator for MSU. I'll just hand over to Liam quickly.
Hi, so my name's Liam. I'm a third and final year politics and sociology student in Maynooth. I've been involved in SU for a number of years, which led me to found the L.E.A.D initiative, which stands for Leadership, Engagement, Awareness and Democracy. And so we're really excited to collaborate with the Politics and Sociology Society as part of our Know Your Leader campaign, really trying to help students understand that our leaders are humans too, and they're just like us. And in that same vein, help them understand the work that you do as politicians, but also to understand that they can become politicians too, and to kind of help them maybe see how to do that. So yeah, thanks so much for having us.
Annie, if you'd like to introduce yourself and give a bit of information.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for having me. I think it's realistic you may say that politicians are just like us, because I don't feel like a politician at all. I sometimes feel like such a super fraud. I've had a really quick trajectory into politics. After the local election, a couple of months later, the general, then I was senator, so I never saw myself in this role. But yeah, actually, back to me and who I am. So I am a senator. I'm with the Labour Party. I am from Drogheda, but the County Meath part of it, very important, very significant in my life. When I was a child, had to go to Navan to get my teeth checked, had to go to Navan to go to get my eyeglasses. What am I? To get my glasses. And then had to, obviously could only vote for myself in the Meath elections. Everyone's like, Louth? I'm like, no, I'm not from Louth. I am most definitely from County Meath. I'm quite new to the whole political game. I'm just out of the student movement, only a couple of years. That's really where my heart is. You can take the gal out of the student movement, but I don't think you can ever take the student movement out of me. I started in UCC, then I did all sorts of student movementy things, and then found myself catapulting into politics. And that's me. I can talk a lot more about all of that, how I got there, but we might get to that at some point.
So that leads me directly into my first question. How did you get into politics, and why did you join your party specifically?
Like I said, I kind of ended up in the Senate. Like, it's just that easy. That's not actually, obviously it's not actually that easy. But like, I think I've always had a real kind of political mind about things, even though I didn't necessarily see myself as political. So like when I was younger in school, for example, I set up this thing called Snail Patrol, because all the boys in my primary school used to go around stamping on the snails. And as an ardent animal welfare person, I took great umbrage with that. So I set up like this Snail Patrol where we had badges and stuff. Anyway, we were told to denounce it. The teacher made us all stand up and throw our snail patrols in the bin, and I was like, I'm not going to do that. Absolutely not. So I had like an underground snail patrol thing going for a while. So you could say I've been kind of political for a long time. For ages I was like, that's not really all that political. And I was like, you had an underground protection of snails movement while you were in primary school. Maybe you were just a little bit political at some point. And then, so I was down in UCC. I went to UCC and I studied drama and theatre studies. And when I was in my undergrad, I wasn't really involved in anything. I kind of like faffed around. Like, theatre, by the way, is a really hectic course to study. Like, everyone's like, oh, you're just, pretending to be a clown. And yes, I did get to be a clown, but it was very hard work. So you don't get to be involved in a huge amount. And then when I went back to college to do my postgrad, I was like, I'm going to be involved in everything. I'm going to get involved in everything. I'm going to do everything. I'm going to go everywhere. I'm going to be everywhere. And ended up becoming auditor of the LGBT Society, coming out. I founded our feminist society, FemSoc, down there. It took years to get it over. They wouldn't let us set one up. And then I ended up running for the union. And the first time I ran for the union, I didn't get elected. But nothing like a woman scorned to not get elected, to get yourself back up again, put on your pirate costume and run for another go. So then I ran again. Then I ran and was involved in the Union of Students in Ireland, which is our national student movement. I was a quality officer for 2 years, then the president. So, and when you're kind of involved in the student movement, you don't necessarily have your political colours. You don't necessarily tie yourself to a political party. So I would have been involved in down in UCC in kind of around the political circle. We have a really strong, much like yourself, we have a really strong down UCC political grouping. Politics and Government Society are really good, and there was loads of us from all sorts of different parties, really good friends, and I was always very close with everyone in the Labour Party. And then when I left the student movement, it made sense to revert back to being in that party. I have obviously had my own criticisms of it, but I saw that as a path for myself. I was president of a union. I'm about workers' rights, and that's where I saw myself going. And then I was involved in repeal. I was involved in lots of things. Then I started working for the party. And then probably to the actual answer you wanted, how did I get involved in politics? Someone asked me to run. I wasn't like, I'm going to do this, despite the fact I was around helping other people run. Someone came to me, Jed Nash, a very good friend of mine, and he's like, will you run? Like, will you run in the locals? I mean, it was 4 weeks out. It was a bit of a tight squeeze. I put my name on the ballot. I put my name out on the 23rd of April. The elections on the 24th of May. Would not recommend a 4-week run-in, but it worked out very well for me because everyone's like, she's never going to make it. She will never make it. She is never going to make it. And I took the fourth seat and pulled ahead of 3 sitting councillors. So whatever. So that is how I got involved in politics, is because someone, even though I was involved in working for the party, someone said, will you run? And that's a particular message to anyone, ask someone, support someone, create a wraparound support around someone, because there are great candidates out there. And if you don't ask them, they may never end up getting their names onto a ballot and becoming senator like myself.
Interesting. Okay, so in a similar kind of vein, what would you say to, young people and students, especially young women, who, first of all, maybe are thinking of getting involved in politics or are interested in politics, or especially to those who are political but don't know it? Do you know what I mean? That have never thought of getting into the institutional side of politics and running for election. What would you say to those types of people, young people in general, and then especially young women, about why maybe you should get involved in politics? And then if you have any tips for like a long way, because obviously it's not easy, but if you had any tips for anyone listening.
Well, set up a snail patrol. No, that's not. You don't have to set up a snail patrol. So by the way, I talk to people all the time. People DM me on Instagram, people DM me on Twitter, and they're like, I am really interested in politics. I'm actually interested in the topic you've spoken about. And we don't necessarily always talk about my party. There are some people who have come to me and they're like, you're a young woman. There's not a huge amount of people like myself in politics. There's, it's a bit more broad now, but there aren't, I'm very, I'm just out of the student movement. I'm very young, one of the youngest senators. People kind of, and anyone listening, please, you can reach out at any point. I do occasionally go into my other inbox in the DM section. It's a little bit risky, but I will go in there and check things out. But, reaching out to people who you resonate with, whether it's because they're talking about an issue, like most people, particularly young people in politics, we're obviously very passionate about it, and we really want to see other young people in politics. So like I talk to people, some of whom have subsequently said, actually, we would like to be interested in joining your own party, and some of whom said, actually, that's not necessarily for me. And I've introduced them then to people in other parties, because I've got friends in most parties, not all parties. I've got friends in most parties. So that's one way, if people are interested, actually to reach out and have a conversation with someone. For young women, it is like, politics is not easy. Like, there's no, like, I'm all bubble and light. It's a mask. It's not a mask. But it is hard. It's tough. I've experienced some really tough things, particularly online. Not all of it online. I've experienced some really big pushback. There's things said to me that have not been said to some of my male colleagues, some of whom my male colleagues and I have had the exact same career trajectory, USI, student movement, same age, same amount of time as being councillors, and some of the things have never been said to them. So if you're a young woman looking at getting involved in politics, I think it's really great to find a mentor or a friend or someone that you can talk to. And there's been some really good people who maybe wouldn't necessarily be elected people that I have around me that are political. Some people who would have been maybe political a good number of years ago. So like Niamh Brathnach is like one of my most favourite people in the world. She was the one, she was a Labour Minister for Education in the 90s. She introduced the concept of publicly funded education in Ireland. And she came down and spoke at something when I was in UCC, and she just talked to, and I kind of just, she kept in touch, and she was like, you can do anything you want. And at that point, politics wasn't even a twinkle in my eye. Being a senator was not even a twinkle in my eye. I didn't even think about it. And she has just been so very good and kind and really supportive to me. So that wraparound support, I think, is really important and if you're a young woman, and it doesn't, as I said, it doesn't have to be a political person. It could just be a friend who is just going to lift you up. You need a hype squad around you if you're going to push yourself into politics. And I think that's really important, is finding that, but availing of opportunities like, training programs, networking events, Women Lead, all of these things, they're all really good opportunities because you'll keep meeting those people. I assure you, you're going to keep meeting those people throughout your political career. I'm only in my political career wet 18 months, and I'm like, sure, you'll keep meeting them your whole life, but you will, I promise you.
I have to agree with you there, needing a good team to support you.
Yeah.
So how does it feel being a newly elected senator to the upper house of the National Parliament? At the moment, you must be feeling incredibly proud and excited, but then COVID-19 happens. You don't get the same experience as a first-time senator would have. Do you feel disappointed, or is there much of a difference in your opinion?
Well, anyone who knows anything about elections and election counts and count centres, there is nothing quite like them. I've been in an election count centre where I have won, and I've been in an election count centre where I scuttle out because I did not win, so I had to skedoodle out of the way and be gone. So they are both the best and the worst place in the world. So it is obviously very different. I was in my living room watching the Shannon count. The cameras were in, and you're like, I think the clerk has put his jacket on. That usually means he's going to make an announcement, because we had just been watching for so many days. We were starting to recognize his symbols. He's he's gone to get his jacket. It means an announcement is imminent, and we the text messages would go crazy. So I have a video my partner recorded of them calling out, but I didn't know if I was going to be. Usually in an election in a count centre, you'll kind of know someone will be yeah, this is, you're out, you're in, whatever. You kind of know before they announce it. Whereas with this one, you were kind of I hope I got the votes. I don't know. I think I could be elected on this count maybe. So that was a really weird experience. I'd love to have been with my family. I'd love to have been in the count centre. Obviously, it doesn't, I'm still thrilled to have been elected, but there are certainly loads of things that we didn't get to do. The first day in the Shannon or the Dole, you usually can bring your family in with you. And my mom, my dad, my sisters, my partner, they're my world, and they have lifted me up so much. And I was really sad that I didn't get to bring them in. They've never seen my office, they've never been in here. I really want to bring my dad in, into the bar so he can see what it's like. I want to bring my mom around so she can see things, because it's really special, I think, actually. And I don't ever want to become so accustomed to being in here that I don't ever see it as being special. So it did make a little bit of it. I was in no way disappointed, but it was a really extraordinary way to get elected. To try to zoom in on the camera to see if this was your moment was super weird. But I've done it all now. I've been lifted on shoulders. I've been scuttled out of a room. I've got elected on a camera. It's I've done it all.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and it's kind of devastating in a way, because I know that's the one thing that I hear from. We had Owen O'Brien on last week, and that's one of the things he said about count centres. I know from ourselves, just being in Students' Union, it's actually something that we won't really have anymore because we've gone online with voting and stuff like that. But it's a really interesting point. Specifically with regards to the Shannon, obviously the Shannon has faced its own criticism throughout the years, notably, having a referendum to try and get rid of it. But there are still a number of issues with the Shannon as a whole. But as a sitting senator, I wanted to kind of get your opinion. Last week, or not last week, I think it was the week before, L.E.A.D as an organisation, we actually have a caucus of senators on our own Senate, which is for the Students' Union. And we passed a motion through the Senate unanimously to change our stance as a union to actually, fight for reform of the Shannon for a number of different areas, but just overall for the need of reform. I was wondering kind of what is your opinion on Shannon reform? Do you agree with it? Do you agree with the Shannon? And then, what do you think should be changed specifically if you think there should be reform?
Unlike some senators, I would have some neck to be in here being like, I am availing of this opportunity that I think should be gotten rid of for everyone else. No, I do think as a broad concept, having two houses is good. I think it's good for democracy. I think it's important. I don't necessarily agree with concentrating power into one house. So just on a broad principle of having two separate legislative houses to work through and look at legislation and things, I think that is good. So, and I think that is good in a global democracy sense overall. So I do think I was part, USI at the time took a stance to support to keep the Seanad. I remember being involved in that and voting in favour of voting to keep the Seanad, so not voting to get rid of it. So I do think that is important, but I absolutely recognise that it is not necessarily representative of what Ireland now looks at or looks like, and that, I mean that from how it is structurally set up, who is able to vote and who is in there. So there are lots of different parts of that I think need to be looked at. How we elect people, who is in there, what are the, like, I think the vocational panels is a really good way to actually try and get a broad cross-section of society. And I remember people were really surprised, and I was like, I do actually have the agricultural background to be on the agricultural panel. They're like, oh, okay, that's, wow, cool. As like, what? So it's there's lots of things, and I know there's lots of different Seanad reform campaigns, and there's all different ways to do that. There's a big Seanad bumper bill proposed that came out of the last Seanad, a cross-party one. That's a big baboon to try and deal with a lot of things. There's some things that can't be done outside of a constitutional referendum, and there are some things that can be done legislatively. I have been here for months and I still cannot say that word. It is to be a legislator who cannot talk about what I do. The shame. Incredible. But so there's the bumper bill for things to do. There would have to be a referendum for certain things to change in it. But I think there are even just who's been put in, like the Taoiseach's nominees and stuff like that. That'll be a referendum to change that. Those are supposed to be representative. And I remember, to be fair, in the last session, I think the Taoiseach's nominees were quite representative. There was people from Pieta House, there was mental health activists, there was I think a broader spectrum of people. So in short, I do love to chit chat. Yes, there does need to be Seanad reform. I do think there should be two houses. I don't think that is good for democracy to have just one concentrated house. But I do think there's a lot more to be done in terms of who is in the room and who can decide who is in the room, in short.
That is quite interesting. And I have to say, on the point before that about election counts, I totally agree. I love them. In your personal experience, what has been the biggest disadvantage and the biggest advantage to being a woman in Irish politics?
Well, the biggest advantage was definitely being a woman. I remember in the local elections, I was running around from door to door, and I looked, people were like, "What age are you?" It's like, "Excuse you, I am old enough to vote, and I'm old enough to be elected as a local councillor." But I was by a country mile the youngest person running, so I really ramped that up. I was running up to people's doors full of energy. I was like, "We need a young woman, all these men," and everyone's like, "Yeah, you're right, actually we do." So I really used that to my advantage. That we needed more women in politics. I think people broadly accept we need more women, we need more diversity anyways. So that was very helpful in the local elections. That was being a woman was really good. It was quite useful. I mean, I suppose the disadvantage is, there is an enormous amount of underlying sexism. People are sometimes really surprised about things. They're like, "Oh, I didn't know you'd be interested in that." Okay, whatever. I recall one of the first interviews I did after I was elected as a councillor, still stinging about this. I was asked, is it appropriate for women to have babies? I'm paraphrasing here, but I can give the exact quote. Paraphrasing, to have babies because they are elected to make laws and improve people's lives. Something along that line. And there was a whole blow up, and the person was like, "I was just referencing the Constitution." I was like, shouldn't have asked the question. And I remember I wasn't feeling very well at the time. It was a phone interview, and I remember being like, I take real umbrage with this question because I don't think you would ask any of the other people that this. And I've never been asked as many times in my life when I was having children as after I got elected in the local elections. It was just everyone's hot topic. They're like, "Where's the babies?" I was like, "Nowhere." I'm not gonna have one yet. And people were just chomping at the bit to find out when I was going to have a family. So there's a lot of talk at the moment, as we know, Minister Helen McEntee is pregnant. She's the first. The last time a cabinet minister woman was pregnant, the child they have was 6 years older than Helen McEntee. Like that is how long ago that I think more there was in the Morgan just at the very end of her term or the very beginning. I can't remember exactly where it was. So like we have a lot of conversations around maternity and opportunities, and you know the dole sits until sometimes 2 a.m. Like there's a disadvantage there in terms of being able to participate because it is not family friendly, it is not maternity friendly, it is ruthless with your time. So in a broader spectrum, there is a disadvantage there because if you want to have a family and stuff, you have to, even if it's only for a couple of days, you're going to have to step out. And that we need to be more understanding that if people don't have children, the world is going to stop. So we shouldn't really be punishing people if they take a couple of weeks off. So yeah, that's a broader disadvantage point. I'll not veer into my high horse on that one.
You actually mentioned about Minister McEntee there. Obviously, one of the Social Democrats TDs have came out and said while she's on maternity leave, she will be like a buddy for her, if that makes sense. What is your opinions on that?
Like, again, this is women stepping up to support other women. You know, I think it's like we have a pairing system. It's used all the time. You know, sometimes people can't do things. Sometimes you have to be in another place. Like pairing is a very common occurrence. And, you know, sometimes it isn't formally worked out for maternity and stuff like that. And there are all these conversations happening in the background. But there should be a better way to deal with that. So like Stella Creasy over in the UK, when she took, when she had a baby not so long ago, and she actually advertised for someone, she hired someone to effectively stand in for her on her constituency work. So she took on another staff member who was like doing the constituency stuff, going to the constituency meetings, doing all the things as her proxy, but the person couldn't vote for her. So that's the thing they couldn't do. But she worked it out herself to bring in someone to do that. And in Ireland, if you have to go off maternity leave, there is a fund to be able to bring in an extra staff person for the period that you are off, so that the office keeps moving and stuff. So there are steps and stuff there. But I don't understand in Ireland or in the world why we've built systems around not recognizing that the human population is going to continue or we're going to keep reproducing. It just seems like when we're like, and now we're going to develop the working day, that at no point someone went, by the way, someone might have to step away for a while to have a baby, or we're going to figure out how to run the country and assume that at no point anyone will ever, like, it seems a bit mad that we've created an entire economic system without recognizing that people might get sick or might have babies at some point. That just seems illogical to me.
Yeah, I think I just happened to note when it came up on my kind of Twitter feed, I was looking again at the Constitution and the women's place in the home, and just even reading it is so jarring to believe that that's in the Constitution right now. So I think that highlights kind of in a way to answer what you were saying there. Yes, because the people designing these systems were men and assumed that women would never ever partake. But the thing that I find so interesting about that was that was just about 100 years ago. Like it was the 1920s when that was written, and we always think that Ireland is a progressive society, but kind of following on from that, in being a woman in politics, and this might be a bit kind of goes down a bit darker, so for anyone watching, I'm sorry, but obviously recently you spoke out about the image-based sexual assault, that was everywhere kind of on social media. And actually, as a side question, I wonder if it was spoken about much on in Leinster House. I was going to say Capitol Hill there, where am I? I was just wondering that, because it was, I know for us, especially as college students, part in the Students' Union, and then obviously on social media, it was everywhere, and I think we're all outraged by it. But having spoken out in a video on your party's page, the comments underneath that video were absolutely horrific by mainly, let's be real, men. And I just kind of wanted to get your feeling on maybe how that felt. I think I can probably guess, but especially as a female politician. And then what do you say to like women who want to run for office? Do you know what I mean? That, oh God, am I going to face that? Like, do I even really want to get involved? And I know this is probably a really long question, but then the last bit is, the image-based sexual assault and all that really kind of bringing up some underlying societal issues that we have not addressed as a country. Specifically, I even just before we came into this interview saw, the Kerry babies the family that was involved in the Kerry Babies pop-up, and that was such an injustice at the time, and it was just such an example of how Irish society was slowly but surely being dragged into the 21st century. So I just kind of wanted to get your opinion on all that. I know there's probably like several questions in there, but yeah.
I'll try and answer them all. Obviously the comments were really unpleasant. It was really uncomfortable. I will say I have super de-duper filters on Twitter. So good, I effectively miss everything. And every now and again, someone like sends me a message and they're like, "Solidarity, Annie, we see what's happening online." And I'm like, oh God, now what? And then I have to like go in and check. So like I went to bed, we posted that video at like 5:30. I went to bed, perfectly normal, like got up the next day and I was like, what is after happening? Like it was bananas. Like it was just like everything had exploded. There were really awful comments. And you kind of have to take those kind of things as being like they're so extreme that you just kind of have to live in a slight disbelief of them. I always find comments to try, and it's not the first, like that was the first time where it was that level of about my body and stuff. I have had like kind of like pile-ons of things when I talk about, trans rights or migrants and stuff, and people will pile on and things there. And like I always think what's more hurtful is when people try to make you out to be, something that you're not, or that you don't believe in, or that you don't stand for. Like that's really bothersome. That you think that people think that about you when I value kindness and compassion for things. But like under that video, it was all just kind of mad. It was just really bananas. And we actually posted a video around about the same time, 24 hours later. And we only realised afterwards that this comparison happened, where Brendan Howland talked about the exact same thing. And like the comments underneath were like, "Well done, Brendan. Time to get this sorted." I was like, what? Obviously, I was thrilled that Brendan did not get all of these comments. But yeah, it was pretty uncomfortable. And to be fair, now people from across the political spectrum reached out, and they're like, "This is awful. We won't, this, like this." Are just reaching out in solidarity. So people from all sorts of different parties were really kind and good. I had a very, with these things as well. Sometimes you don't want to draw attention to them because it can actually make situations worse. So sometimes when there's like things, you're like, if drawing attention to this, is that actually going to make a person's life better or worse? And I always think about that when I'm talking about some things, but like loads of people just like hopped in and were supportive, and we're just like, this is not how we treat women, or we just not how we treat politicians, this is not how we speak to people. And yeah, I do actually think we have a long way to go. Like we praise ourselves, look at the flags behind me, we praise ourselves and being really progressive about things, but the kind of blaming that came out around that image-based sexual stuff. I did an interview with someone, a radio interview, and the interviewer was like, "Sure, I've been in WhatsApps where people have forwarded on images that they shouldn't have forwarded on." And I was like, first of all, what are you doing in that WhatsApp? Second of all, you need to check your friends. And third of all, that's going to become a crime really soon. But it's just so casual, like this is just, yeah, cool, I've had this happen. I've been in group, like this real low level kind of stuff where like this is perfectly normal to send around images of people, and like if you don't want your image to be sent around, don't take it. Like that's like saying if you don't want to be murdered, don't be alive. That is nonsense. Like if you do something in consent with someone else and they breach that is their problem, and it is never your problem. So I do think it has raised some underlying issues, and we talked about it a lot in both of the houses. It's very different. That particular case is very difficult. No, the facts hadn't quite come out, and things were moving really fast online, and there was all sorts of things that were potentially had happened. So there's lots of trying to figure out what was going on. But it's certainly opened up, and we have a lot of conversations happening at the moment around domestic violence. The Labour Party have proposed, we've had a bill for about 3 years around harmful communications, which would make things like sharing people's images without their consent a criminal offence. Online harassment would become a criminal offence. And we've had that bill for 3 years. Like long before I was twinkling the Labour Party's eye. People keep tweeting being like, "Well done, Annie, on writing that bill." And I was like, yes, I wrote that bill when I was in the student movement. Thank you. It was Brendan Howland who did all the work, but that will hopefully now be passed Friday week. It's coming to the Senator, and it's going to get through final stages, and it'll be done, and it'll be law for the end of the year, and that's really important. But it took 3 years to get there, and a few fairly serious events to happen before the government were like, "Oh yeah, I suppose we should." I just dramatically really stopped talking there. Sorry.
No, you're okay. Lucy, do you want to come in on that, or?
Yeah, no, I agree. It should have been brought into law, and especially it's great to see that it's going to be brought in before the end of the year, because so many people were impacted on it. So I was just I was just blown away by what you were saying. I was just sitting back listening, but I had to conduct the interview.
That's me. I just chit.
The next question is, do you so obviously students have struggled since COVID. So as myself and Liam has said already, we haven't been back on campus properly for lectures since the 12th of March. Do you understand how much students are struggling right now during lockdown and COVID-19?
I mean, I'm not an on-campus student right now, so I'm very but I'm very close to the student movement. So I recognise how extraordinarily difficult this has been. I keep very close contact with the student movement. Not to brag, but I was the president of the student movement at one point. So in terms of that very practical, I think it's really important as a public rep to constantly keep in contact with your base and understand things, which has been a bit weird when you can't talk to people. It's the most unnatural state of being for a politician to not be able to talk to people in person and shake hands and do whatever they do. So it's a bit, I think I have extraordinary sympathy for students right now. I've raised that a number of times. I've raised about the fact, students back on campus needs to be done very safely, but to recognise that students have carried an enormous burden over the past couple of months, not just leaving cert students, but students people messaging me who have spent their entire career of studying medicine thus far in their bedroom. This is not, we have lots of issues around the universities and higher education institutions at the moment in terms of fees and stuff like that, but this is not the way it is supposed to be. So, there's a huge amount of commending someone, commending the student movement and students for actually getting through all of this. I think it's been extraordinarily difficult. And I hope that, as we start to ease out, that you get back on campus and have at least some of that student experience, because let me tell you, everything I learned in college was all done outside the classroom. I am who I am because of everything that happened, not in the books that I learned or anything like that. It was the societies, the clubs, it was the friends, it was the getting involved, the opportunities that gave me. And I suppose a big thing that I'd be very aware of is around, there's very particular cohorts of students for whom this is really different. I mentioned medical students. We've got student nurses and stuff who are out and about. Really, that's a really big campaign at the moment around student nurses and how to support them and pay them, basic concept. So it's, there's even within the student movement, there's pockets of people for whom are also being affected in different ways. So I am deeply sorry that this is happening. I wish the student experience so much on people because it's so important.
Yeah. I might, we just kind of wanted to ask that as kind of to intro into some of the student issues. So we will come to the nurses just in a second, but on kind of the wider student issue, obviously it's the quality of education has fallen dramatically. We're doing not only online lectures, a lot of pre-recorded lectures. So essentially you're just watching YouTube, you're just doing an online course, but yet we're paying the highest fees in the European Union to do so. So higher education funding is obviously something that I myself even have taken interest in and I've kind of done research into, but obviously USI have been fighting for God knows how long, for years now. But it's interesting as well that you mentioned Minister Niamh Bhreathnach and how, we've gone from essentially having no fees, from being successful in getting rid of higher education fees, in the understanding that higher education, as all education, should be a right and not a privilege, and that we need to not only have a publicly funded model, but, and I say this not just as my opinion, but also as fact, when you take a look at the system as a whole, the higher education system is fundamentally flawed in terms of its funding. It's not sustainable. The quality of education is falling and the dropout rates are incredible, especially now more than ever. So I kind of just wanted to get your opinion, and as your party spokesperson for, higher education, what would Labour's view, be on publicly funded, higher education system, as is outlined in the Cassell's report and others, and if you want to kind of go into that, maybe.
Yeah, so the Cassell's report and I have a particular bugbear with each other because it came out when I was president of USI. We were on our way came out on the Monday. We had our SUT Student Union training, which is the annual huge big event enormous amount of prep goes into that. All the student union officers from around the country come together to do that. And on the morning of that, my card also got stolen over the weekend, so we were also wondering how I was going to get there. The Castles report launched, the biggest report that was ever going to happen about the future funding of higher education. So it was a real baptism in like, off we go. I remember not even like reading the whole thing, like just like scanning straight to the part where it was publicly funded. I was like, perfect, it's in there. Right, that's all we're going to talk about. And that was the first thing I had to deal with when I was president of USI. So me and the Castles report go back a long time, and I am constantly talking about it to Janet. I'm like, this came out when I was president of USI, and we still haven't sorted it. I am obviously an enormous supporter of public funded education. I wouldn't be able to be involved in something that didn't support publicly funded education. I would be very firm in my belief that we have to have publicly funded education. I think actually broadly across the political spectrum, everyone was like, yeah, we probably should have publicly funded education, in across the parties. Actually, I think there's an awful lot of people who think that, and some people are a little bit more het up about how it's going to get paid. But I always say these things are an investment. But I can go on my treatise about why we ought to have publicly funded education. And I mean, the you mentioned around like funding of higher education, the future funding of higher education, like there is an enormous amount of money that needs to go into the higher education sector. As I said already, it is an investment. And it doesn't, and by the way, when I talk about into the education sector, because we can sometimes, over the last few years, it can be just talking about universities, a very particular kind of education. I think education is a very broad landscape from cradle to grave, as I say, and there should be learning opportunities for everyone the whole way through. So there needs to be that kind of, not unified, but a landscape from within which people can participate at different ages and different parts of their life, and in different styles of learning and different levels of learning. Not everyone has to get a degree, but we do need to invest as a whole in that post-second level education sector. I don't even understand how the institutions are still going. We ran out, the famous line that we constantly talk about, we ran out of road years ago, and the system is creaking and it is surviving on goodwill and unpaid postgraduate people bloody teaching for free.
Yeah, just as a kind of brief kind of follow-up on that as well. The current government obviously did something new, which started off kind of being kind of hopeful, which is they created an entire department for, innovation in higher education. What good has that done? It seemed to be such for us, it definitely looked like there was going to be hope, apart from an odd 250 quid. And the fact that, when you take a look at the department itself, it doesn't actually, like in, Nordic countries, have a centralized higher education system where all the universities and higher education institutions are do you know what I mean? In some way doing the same thing. And I think we saw the flaw with that when COVID came around, and they're all announcing different things at different times. Yeah. In your opinion, has there been any benefit to it, or how would, if you were right now the Minister for Higher Education, how would you change that?
Jeez, I'd be sweating now if I was Minister for Higher Education. Jeez, I'd be sweating. I mean, I don't want to, like, the department is as old as I am a senator, and I don't yet know what I'm doing or how it's going, so I don't want to throw cold water over something yet. I do think we have to give both the minister and the department time to find their feet, to find what they're doing. I mean, I talked about how I believe education needs to be a spectrum, from very early years all the way to whatever point in your life you want to learn. So I do have a concern around separating out those. But I also think then there comes great opportunities to actually having this focus on furthering higher education, innovation, research and science, to actually integrate then with other departments, with other sectors. So it actually isn't just education in a silo over here, and it's just students 18 to 22 going and learning. It is integrated in with the other departments, integrated, enterprise and innovation. So there's an opportunity actually for it to be a continuous, almost like a weave throughout the fabric of society. And I think that is what I would love to see happen with the department. I'd love to see that really integration with all sorts of different parts of society, from business to heritage, it's a spectrum, and that the department and the minister really works on weaving it into the fabric of society. I think education is so important. We talk about the land of saints and scholars. I think education at any kind of education, again, it doesn't have to be a degree, it doesn't have to be a university thing, the opportunity to learn and for a while step out of yourself and to think about things that you would not necessarily get to think about unless you were in that learning environment, whether it's on Zoom or in a classroom or out in a training setting, is so important for an individual. So I think those opportunities being woven into the fabric of society and it just being a part of people's day-to-day life, you know, learning opportunities and work, continuing professional development, all of those things, that it's just perfectly normal to be able to take up learning opportunities at any point of your life is something I would really love to see actually Ireland in, that we just champion education at any point at any time, people popping in and out at whatever time is right for them, you know, and I'd love to see that as part of, and that if I was the minister, that would be how I would be looking at things. How do we integrate learning opportunities and education into every fabric and every fabric of society, so it's not students over here, it's that anyone at any point can be a student, and that learning is just an opportunity, a continuum at any point.
Yeah, excellent. So finally we get to them, the student nurses. So obviously a really, really hot topic over the last while. I know you've been working on it even just the last few days by introducing a bill to really start to begin to address this. It's just, I can't even. It seems like such a black and white option, do you know what I mean? Especially when presented to government. And I think everyone in the country, majority of people, apparently not the members of government, were outraged by the fact that they haven't been paid to date and that the government decided not to pay them. Now, they have their own reasons, you know, the fact that they're doing, research into it, and that the motion brought by People for Profit last week was, you know, a political stunt, and that it was just used to kind of show the government up. What's your opinion on that? And because to me, I can't really get my head around it, but if that was the case, surely all of the opposition parties of all kind of political spectrums wouldn't have, you know, come together to vote against the government in that sense, if it was so, you know, obviously they were going to do something about it, and they haven't today. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but I'll let you kind of talk away on it anyway.
Oh, you know me, I'll talk away. Yeah, so I mean, I actually think, like, looking at the votes on it, I don't think I've ever seen such a clear 100% of opposition on this way, 100% of government on that side. You know, a motion is different to legislation. So as you mentioned, I have a little bill here to pay student nurses. So I mean, there's different ways to get it done. Like, the motion wouldn't necessarily have actually affected getting it done. So maybe, you know, legislation could be a way to do that. You know, there was all sorts of interesting reasons given for why they didn't vote in favour of that motion. You know, it dealt with too many things. There was too many things on it. You know, blah, 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 blah. Which is interesting because my bill just deals with paying student nurses. So that's that one dealt with. That excuse is out the window. And like, look, you have to accept that sometimes things are put in and they put government on the back foot, and that's part of the political game. But like, we've been talking about this for a really long time. Like, I put up a picture the other day, 2014, outside St. Stephen's Hospital down by Houston, where I was protesting with student nurses, our hashtag Everybody Loves Nurses campaign. You know, because student nurses at the time would be paid $6 something an hour, like, bonkers. You know, that took years to even get that moved along. We've been talking about how we treat nurses. We've talked about how we treat teachers, and there's no coincidence that these are vocational careers, that we rely on goodwill and people just doing it. And I always think, like, and when people say, well, we can't pay people on training because that'll undermine their training, like, what? Like, that's nonsense. You know, like, I've never heard such a bizarre excuse, like, we can't pay them because then they won't be learning. Like, go away. You know, so that's crazy. And then the excuse of, like, oh, we don't pay other trainees, so why would we pay them? Well, you should pay them too. You know, if someone is doing work that, you know, and I think there is a subtle difference between, you know, shadowing and just watching someone all the time and out doing work. And if you are out doing work, and if you were to be taken off doing that, could that work be done, or would that work be done by someone else? And if the answer is no, then you should be paid for it. That's it. That's the tweet. There's no messing around this one. And particularly student nurses, and any student nurse I've spoken to, as I said, I did one tonight with student nurse. I did one a couple of weeks ago. I'm constantly engaging with student nurses, and people sending me messages, and we're chatting and stuff. If they were taken out of the system could not cope. And I think that is the real fundamental on this. You know, the INMO have talked about this, like, it is exploitation. They are being rostered on because there is not enough nursing staff. And if they are taking filling in for staff who are supposed to be there and paid, then it is abhorrent that they are not being paid. It is, I just, you can, student nurses and anyone who is on training cannot eat a round of applause. Like, that doesn't pay the bills. And student nurses pay the highest fees in Europe now that the UK are out the gap, for the honour of working unpaid and then having to take a second job in normal times, working crazy hours over weekends so that they can then go back into their training unpaid. Like, if you were to write this down as a business plan, you'd be like, this is a terrible plan. We are not doing this. We are not telling them to pay us to not get paid to work. That's crazy. We would never design a system like this. And yet somehow, here we are. So I kind of went to a bit of a rant there. Apologies. But, to me, it is very black and white. Either we value our workers, our student nurses, or we don't. That's it.
Sorry, couldn't unmute. Have to agree with you there, and commend the work of our student nurses as well. Obviously, Maynooth doesn't have student nurses because we don't offer that, but every student nurse around Ireland is appreciated by fellow students, and hopefully they will be getting paid soon. So you've been a student leader, a councillor, a general election candidate, and a senator. While it's still early days, what's next for you?
I mean, I guess I'll have to run for president, maybe. I don't know. I'm not gonna, I'm really someone who, I always say, if an opportunity presents itself, I'll take it. When Jed was like, will you run? I was like, okay. The general election, even though I was never going to get elected, I was like, I'm going to give it a go. I put myself forward for the Seanad, even though I wasn't the tip-top favourite to win our internals. I'll take any opportunity that arises. So I don't know what's next. I've had like a million careers already. Like, I really kind of jumped through an awful lot of careers by the time I reached my early 30s. So I'd like to stay in politics, I think, for a little bit longer. I think I'm raising and working on issues that are really important and that need to be raised. I don't think that necessarily always get raised, and that's why you need different people in there. And I think it's important to have someone who's from a student activist background in one of our houses to be able to talk about those things. I think it's important to have representation from the LGBT community in our houses. I think it's important to have a young woman who's being faced, things like putting off having a family because I want to stay in politics. I think those voices are important, so I think I have a contribution to make. So I'd certainly like to be in politics for a little bit longer, and if I'm not, then that's okay. I'll brush myself off, I'll pick myself back up again, and I'll start a whole other career. Who knows, maybe I'll go back to theatre, which is what I used to do, or general activism, placards and roaring and shouting. I don't know, but I hope to stay in politics a little bit longer, and if not, I'll find my path.
So similar in kind of your future, I was just kind of wondering what your opinion is on your party's future, and about, in your opinion, and we've asked this of we will be asking this of all the politicians that we do interview, is specifically the Labour Party relevant, and where do you see its future currently and possibly in the next general election? Do you know what I mean? As for a long time, the Labour Party would have been pretty much the only left-wing party or centre-left party in Ireland. Now that gap has kind of been filled up by a number of different, colours and parties. What is your specific kind of, where do you kind of carve a space for the Labour Party for its future success to kind of claim back seats and to grow? And I suppose in that, would you agree with, a full left kind of government, and could it function in that same sense?
I mean, I would love a full left government. I mean, part of the problem with the left is that we like to split ourselves up, and we've got splinters and all sorts of things. I think Alan Kinsled did a really interesting timeline image a couple of weeks ago about the history of the left in Ireland, and the chart was splitting and going all over the place. So getting all of us to work together could be really interesting, but we really ought to be able to. I mean, the Labour Party is one of the oldest parties in Ireland. It is the oldest party in Ireland. We have a history, and like anything, there can be blips on the way. But we have a history around workers' rights. Some really important things that have happened under the Labour Party. LGBT rights. Children's allowance. There's all sorts of really important historical things that we simply take for granted now, that were part of when Labour were in government and pushing some of these progressive things. So I do think the historical role that we have played is important. You know, as I said, as a member of the LGBT community, like, it's important to me to be in a party that supports LGBT people, particularly trans rights at the moment. You know, that's getting really ugly, and I think I couldn't be in a party that didn't value that. You know, we were the ones who brought the gender recognition legislation in with an enormous amount of fanfare. Like, it just happened, and then people were able to live their lives perfectly normally. And that's something that there's now a really big kickback against, to try and undo that. And they can get in the sea. We're not going to undo that. You know, so that to me is important, that history that we've done, and that stuff that we've carved out. And in terms of relevancy, like in the last couple of weeks, we've put forward on sick pay during a global pandemic legislation, a right to switch off. We have the citizenship, Born Here, Belong Here, which has got government support. We've Coco's Law, which is around online harmful communications. That's going to be passed in before. Like, those are two fairly significant bills, by the way, for an opposition party to manage to get through in the first 6 months of government. Like, I don't want to brag, but that's pretty significant. You know, do you know what I mean? Those are really important things. So I think, like, if you want to talk about relevancy, we're putting issues on the table around workers' rights. We're putting issues on the table that are relevant. The issues we're talking about are relevant. And if we weren't putting them there, maybe someone else would be putting them there. I don't want to cast aspersions on anyone else, but I think it is important that we are putting those issues on the table. Workers' rights, sick pay, online abuse and harmful communication, citizenship, people who are born here should belong here. Like, these are really important, relevant issues, and I'm very proud to be a part of a political party at the moment who is bringing those issues up, and in the first 6 months of being since the general election, really, I think, putting important issues on the table. So I think the issues we're talking about are very relevant, and therefore I think that we are relevant.
So my next question is, so obviously you're not a member of Dáil Éireann, but when is the next general election going to be? So I predicted September. Liam, do you want to give your prediction? September next year. Sorry.
No, I was like,
you keep asking me this and I never know, so I'm going to give it another 2 years. I don't know.
Yeah, so the last government, everyone was like, they'll never make it past a week. And then they're like 6 months, a year. And we just kind of lived on tenterhooks for a general election. And then they got 4 years out of it. Like, it's real easy to posture and be like, we're going to tear the government down. But as a general rule, people recognize that that's not necessarily always good for a country. If it has to be torn down because of some sort of great, dreadful scandal, let's deal with it. But as a general rule, most people want to get work done. Most people recognize work takes a couple of months, if not a year or two. I would be optimistic that we'll get a couple of years out of this government, because I think it is good to have a couple of years to try. If they can't get the stuff done and it doesn't work out, then we'll deal with them at the polls. We'll deal with them in the ballot box. But this, I hope we get a year or two out of it. I like what I'm doing. But from a real practical sense, collapsing a government is a dramatic act, and if we want to collapse a government, it has to be a really, really worthwhile reason to do it. Pulling a country into disarray for the crack is not what I would be terribly supportive of. But if something comes up and it has to go, it has to go, and we'll deal with that when it comes up. But I don't know, people. We had 4 years of this, like, it's all going to collapse any minute from now. And Jesus, if someone will come into the office every day being like, I was just in Leinster House and I heard that they're going to collapse the government next week. I said, Jesus, we 2 years of that then when I was in work. And we were just like, stop it, stop. And then all of a sudden they went whoosh, and we suddenly had a general election. So I hope we have a bit more time than next September. I hope we have, closer to Liam's guess, a year or two. First of all, to give the government an opportunity to try and get what they promised to do done. I think they should get an opportunity to do that. And if they can't do that, well, then we'll deal with that. And we will go out and we'll fight the good fight for putting forward a vision that is different to what they did.
I'm glad to actually see that you're like, just let them do stuff and we'll deal with them at the polls, because I believe in that. And we asked Donald Bryn the same question last week, and he was more just what I had said, hopefully they can get to September. But they don't. But I have a few other questions that came out over our social medias. So one was that was only broken today. So I put up a box earlier on. Someone this question: what is your opinions of Alan Kelly not wearing the mask on the Lewis last night? His excuse was that he was watching the match. He was a bit distracted.
Yeah, I mean, look, I accept his excuse. You can kind of see it hanging off his ear as well. I think we all have to be really conscientious about what we're doing. I think particularly people in the public eye have to be really conscientious. I think every person, like one day was halfway down the corridor and I was like, oh, my mask! I had to floor it back into my office and grab a mask. It can happen to anyone. What is it? Cast ye not a stone, the sinner without, whatever that proverb or whatever whatever that thing is, we know what I mean. I think he certainly has apologized, and I think we all just have to be really conscientious that this is a kind of a thing we just have to do all the time now. We just constantly have to do the kind of pat, is it on my face, even though we're not supposed to touch our faces, but we just constantly have to be so aware of it. I think that's really important.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm like, is my glasses on tight enough? Because that's how I know if the mask
Oh
is
yeah,
on.
if my glasses aren't steaming on, I'm like, oh, I've forgotten my mask.
Another question is, now this one came from someone, and myself and Liam were trying to figure out what it was meant by, so hopefully you can get it.
Okay.
What does Labour feel are the most important aspects for next year's budget?
Most important aspects for next year's budget. So for this year's budget, we put forward a document which wasn't exactly like an alternative budget, which we usually do, but it was called a new social contract. And we put forward ideas for what it is that we want Ireland to look like, and then how you could do that in a budget. So we put forward, for example, we talked, obviously it had to be in response to COVID because that's kind of the frame, the setting we're in. So for example, in the training section, I talked a lot about training opportunities throughout people's lives, really funded training opportunities. The government really invests heavily in education. We talked about a youth guarantee. What are we going to do for young people to ensure that they have opportunities, and meaningful opportunities, by the way. I don't think a job for a job's sake is not good enough. We want people to have meaning and to be happy and well, and to be, I think it's important that we don't have people jumping from contract to contract until the end of time. Meaningful work to be able to participate, I think, is really important. What I think is really important is investment in education and opportunities. What is the budget doing to create opportunities for people? So where are we putting money that creates opportunities for people, for growth, for personal development, for learning opportunities, for career opportunities? How is that money being spent to enhance that for citizens, for the regular Joe? So that's kind of, it's like an ideological thing for what I think is the most important thing in the budget. But I think if you look at your framework for where you're investing money, what are we doing? That could go for our health service. Where are we investing money in the health service that creates best outcome and opportunities for people? Where are we investing money into education that creates best opportunities and outcomes? And that could be investing regionally into places. Letterkenny IT is a really great institution, and it provides enormous opportunity for Donegal and up in the very far northwest. What are we doing to ensure the sustainability of that? Where are we investing money in that? We talk about offering, particularly during COVID, financial supports to businesses. And I think what needs to come with that, and what should be really important, is what is the contract between that business and the worker? If the state is supporting you and your business, are you trade union recognition? Are you ensuring what are the working conditions? I think that should be a part of it. When we're as a state giving money to things, what is the social contract that we're making? And I think that can be done through the budget. Sorry, that was again a bit ideological, but that is what I think. And I think, as we said, we put forward a social contract. You can find it up online about what we put forward as being what we think should be in a budget, and how to approach doing a budget.
Yeah, no, definitely. No, I'm glad that made a lot more sense into the question originally of what we were trying to figure out.
I hope that made sense. I hope I answered the question right. My ideological framework. This is what we should do with the budget.
This is another one. Ideal coalition partners.
Ideal coalition partners. I would like to work with progressive people. I think coalition partners, I think progressive people who, just answering that question, say for example around the social contract, parties and individuals who agree around trade union rights, collective bargaining, educational opportunities for people, really truly building an island and an Ireland that we can all be proud to live in, and that no person is left behind. And I think there are individuals and there are parties for whom I think can work across the spectrum. And I think, I don't necessarily think that all politicians, even in parties who I don't agree with, are bad people. I think most of the people I've met in here are hardworking, are really committed to their communities. I maybe don't agree with their politics, but there's very few people actually that it's really easy to think of people as being like these kind of like monsters. And I definitely I used to be sitting there as a student leader being like, I'm going to email that jerk and I'm going to tell them what I think of them. And then I'd meet them in here and I'm like, oh God, you're a delight. So I may not want to be in a coalition with them, but I just thought it's really struck me that there are an awful lot of hard workers in here. But I think there's a really good progressive group of parties and a progressive group of people elected this time. Hopefully there'll be more elected next time, and enough to actually create that progressive government that I think actually Ireland does want.
Yeah, no, definitely. So I'm guessing you're not ruling out the soft Dems then.
I'm certainly not someone to go ruling people in and out of anything. I think it's very audacious to rule people in and out before the people themselves have decided who they want in and out. So I wouldn't, certainly, that's not my job. My job is to look after myself and see where I am, and then we'll figure out who we're going in and out with afterwards.
Would you like to add anything else? Because we're just going to start. We're going to start wrapping up now. So, any advice to any person, young person watching it here tonight, male and female, on getting involved in politics or getting involved in the student movement?
Do it. Get involved in your local senate and get involved. USI. I mean, obviously it's a little bit different this year because a lot of things are online. But USI runs great things like pink training, women lead. Diversity opportunities. Like, get involved in those. Talk to your union about whether or not you can go to them. Find people to talk to, like both of you. I'm sure would be very reasonable and fair people to talk to about people who are interested in getting involved. And you can get in touch with myself. I mean, and I promise I won't talk about bread and roses or anything like that. I'm very happy just to talk to people about what my own experience has been like as someone who's been a student quite recently and into politics. But if there's something that you're interested in, and there are always going to be people who are going to stand in your way. There are going to be people who don't think you should do it because they'd be afraid you're not going to get elected. There are people who don't think you should do it because they think you're too up yourself and like, who do you think you are? There's people who are going to talk you, dissuade you from it because it's really difficult. This is hard. This is really hard. Like I'm a very sunny disposition, but it's hard. This is hard work and things can drag you down. And then there are going to be absolute, I'm not going to swear, absolute awful people online who'll do anything to try and wreck your life. But if you have people around you who are supportive, all you need, do you know what I mean? You'll weather that and you'll get over that. And if you believe in yourself, or do you know what, you don't have to believe in yourself, if someone else's belief in you, that's enough. Jed Nash believed that I could do it, and he supported me and carried me through that local election. And because of him and his belief in me and my partner's belief in me, my friends who came out from all over the country and trekked up to Meath to campaign with me, they believed in me when I didn't believe in me. So anyone who wants to get involved, find someone to believe in you. I'll come and believe in you and support you and talk to you about anything that you want. But even if you don't end up getting elected or you don't put yourself forward, just getting involved in an election campaign, volunteering to go canvassing, nothing teaches you humanity like canvassing door to door. Woo boy, nothing teaches you what humanity is like knocking up people's doors. So get involved any way you can. Email a local candidate, be like, I'd love to come canvassing for you. They'll literally pull your arm off to get you to go and do it. So there's plenty of opportunities to get involved, and good luck.
Exactly. I won't be running this election if it wasn't for people. It's the second time to run for the position. We'd sincerely like to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us this evening. And just to remind people, we have the Senator leader with us tomorrow evening, a fellow Meath East general election candidate. I didn't work with my demographics out there, right?
A little bit of over-representation of Meath. We have a lot of Meath people floating around. Good county. I was
just thinking that there today. I was like, I have 2 candidates in Meath East. But we're delighted to have you here this evening, Annie, and hopefully we can welcome you out to Maynooth soon.
Absolutely, I'd love to come out.
Yeah.
Great.
But thanks very much. Liam, anything to add?
Yeah, no, thanks so much. I really appreciate it, and to give kind of your experience. And it's great to see a young leader in the Seanad, which would have normally been seen as, a retirement home or somewhere for older politicians, as it's been described. So it's great to see an example of what you can be. Do you know what I mean? And to hear how you've done it. So thank you so much, and the best of luck.
Thank you for having me. I had a blast. You can do it too. Come join me in the challenge.
I'm going for young Taoiseach at the minute.
Support you all the way.
Thanks very much, and thanks to everybody for joining us as well this evening. We'll put the recording up on our socials as well.